Il y a du son. Il y a du son. Alors, ah oui, mais il y a un léger différé de. C'est bon? Vous m'entendez là après? D'accord. So, thank you for coming. It was not so easy to organize this meeting and seminar at Leuch. So, thank you for your collaboration for this organization. So, we will have some video conference for some colleagues in US and some colleagues in Japan, but uh, we have mainly face-to-face presentation. So I have few slides that I have to introduce by École de Physique des Houches. So you have received the special COVID health safety measures. So we invite you to respect all the safety measures during the seminar. So in the Cécile de Witt building, so in this direction you have the library. So you have some books in physics and mathematics if you are interested during the break. You have 3 computers with a copy machine and scan and 2 kitchens that you can use for coffee break. Cold drink have to be paid, but at the end of the seminar, you pay by cash at the restaurant. Just have to put your name if you take some cold drink. And other coffee and tea are free. For the reception office, so it will be open during the break. So we have to register and to pay for your bedroom on lunch. Internet, so you have in your book you have your Wi-Fi code. So if you have some problem, you can also ask questions to the administration. The restaurant, so most of you we have the dinner last night. So we have breakfast between 7:45 to 8:45, lunch at 12:30, and dinner at 11:30. And a lunch box are also available if you want to go outside, especially Wednesday. Rooms, so there is no key on the room, but a small safe into every closet. It is cleaning in the morning. You have a number in case of emergency. On the last day, you have to vacate your bedroom by 9. Okay. We will have a drink cocktail at 7 this evening. It will be at the restaurant. So just a short introduction for the seminar. So it was in this seminar we would like to mix different communities coming from statistics, coming from geometry, coming from geometric mechanic, physics, statistical physics. So we have made this poster where you have the first line is more on thermodynamics, the third one is more on statistical physics, the third one is more on information geometry, and the next one is more on geometric mechanics, on mathematics, and the last one is for women. Sorry for that, but we have not added. We have request to add some random in the picture to put women everywhere. So the main topics are geometric structure of statistical physics and information, with statistical mechanics and geometric mechanics, thermodynamics, symplectic and contact geometries, so it's more people coming from geometries, Lie group thermodynamics, relativistic and continuous media thermodynamics, and symplectic integrators, so it's more a community of statistical physics and geometry. on the physical structure of inference and learning, where you have a stochastic gradient of Langevin dynamics, information geometry, Fisher metric, natural gradient, Monte Carlo Hamiltonian method, variational inference on Hamiltonian control on Boltzmann machine. Okay, so here you have the program. So we have a few. So we have put the video conference. So today we have this one of Steven Sman from US in video conference. On a last minute change because Francisco Chinesa has to come back to Spain because he has problem with his family, and will give also his talk by video conference. Tomorrow is mainly face-to-face meeting, but only the two last one, Manuel de Leon and Elena Celedoni. It will be in video conference. Tomorrow morning we have also a small change because François Gebelmaz has a problem, health problem, and so he will switch with Suzanne Steele. So these two one are in video conference, and François will be also in video conference. So Suzanne will be on Thursday, and we switch with François. On the second day, we have also the last one from US will be in video conference, but from Japan with Hirohiko Yoshimura. On the last day, Frank is in Japan, and so it will be in video conference on Giovanni Piston with end the session. Okay, thank you. So we will start the first talk. So I would like to introduce Eric Moulin, who is working in CEMAP. He works in CEMAP, which is Applied Mathematics in École Polytechnique. And he previously was in Telecom Paris, and so he has a long career in statistics and signal processing, especially for telecommunication and other kind of application. And his talk today will be up. Oh yes, sorry, we have. I have forgotten the poster. So we have 18 posters that will be presented in the next room. So you have the list here on the program. Here you have a hard copy of the program with poster if you need a hard copy. And I have also forget we have a request by Springer to make proceedings of the seminar. So if you have motivated, it's not a constraint, but if you are interested to make a long or short paper from your talk, we will invite you after the seminar. Yeah, so I come back to Eric. So Eric will give us 3 hours lectures on Langevin dynamics, old and new. And I think you will appreciate because he will make a large survey of this domain. And Eric is interested to extend this approach also for more geometric one. And so it will be also the interaction of this seminar to try to make some bridge between the different communities. So I give the floor to Eric.
Thanks a lot. So I will switch also the Okay, so as the title suggests, it will be old and new. So I will, what I will cover is the work we have done since say 5 years, I would say, on Langevin dynamics. So I'm trying to extend right now this type of ideas to do a kind of Bayesian inference on manifolds, on Riemannian manifolds. So I have a PhD thesis on this, but I will not discuss this part. So I will more discuss what we did, say from 2014, I would say, and a little bit before on how to analyze overdamped Langevin dynamics, and then also underdamped. But I will not discuss underdamped; it's more difficult. And before this, what I will give for 3 hours, and I would divide my talk in, say, 3 parts. So the first part is really introductory, because I know that most of you are not from Bayesian statistics, most of you are not from the simulation community, so we'll give a kind of crash course on Markov chain Monte Carlo and its use in Bayesian statistics, and also I will explain basically what are the classical techniques to which have been used to measure what is called the mixing time of Markov chain, which is a very important problem in simulation. Then I will introduce overdamped Langevin dynamic and its use in Bayesian statistics, and then I will start presenting the analysis in a very simple case where the potential is strongly convex. And I will end up with, so basically it will be around the break, then a little bit perhaps after the break. And then I will just try to explain how these ideas can be extended. Okay, so what's the outline of my first hour, basically? So the first thing is why we need to use Markov chain Monte Carlo, MCMC. Then I will cover some Markov chain theory, and I will not explain what is Markov chain, of course, but I will try to set up some of the notation that I use all the time. And so then I will explain what is one of the most famous algorithms in MCMC, which is due to the work of the 2 physicists, Metropolis and Rosenbluth, and which has been later extended by Hastings in the 70s. So it's an algorithm which can be traced back to the early 50s. Then I will explain how you start to analyze what are the classical tools to analyze the mixing rate of this algorithm, and why these tools are not really sufficient to do what we are willing to do. And then I will start to speak about Langevin. Okay, so why do we need MCMC? So MCMC is a method which is done to do some simulations. So what I'm willing to do, basically, I am willing to sample a distribution on a certain state space. So the state space can be general. So typical examples are where the state space are discrete. So for example, it can be n, but n it can be something like a discrete state space, but with a very large number of state space. It can be even infinite. Or, of course, it's the other type of example is when x is equal to RD, in which case you might assume, for example, that you are willing to sample a distribution which has a density with respect to Lebesgue measures. That's another example, but of course you might have, I will not describe that today, but you might have much more complex structure for x, which can be graphs, it can be manifolds, or things like that. So I will try to explain why this is important, and it is important related to my work, because what I do basically is Bayesian statistics, and when you do with Bayesian statistics is that you are performing inference on parameters. So here the parameters are x, okay, x which are unknown, and this x belongs to the state space. And typically what the prior information I've got from my knowledge of the problem is more or less translated into a prior distribution. So I've got a prior distribution which is denoted P, which is a prior on the parameter space. And they have, of course, I have another term which is the information I got from the observation. And this additional term, which incorporates the information I've got from the observation, is called the likelihood function. So it's this L, Y given X. So y here are the observation, x is a parameter, and when you are doing Bayesian statistics, what you are willing to sample is an object called the posterior distribution of the parameter given the observation, which is given by this formula, which is like the product of the prior times the likelihood, and you redivide this by the normalizing constant. So normalizing constant typically is a very large dimensional integral, because typically in problem of interest, the state space is x is very large, it's large dimension, so typically you do not know this normalizing constant. So the normalizing constant in general is not tractable. So the problem in Bayesian statistics is to sample a distribution which is known up to a constant. This is an important issue, so we don't know the normalizing constant. And sometimes it's of interest to, there are many problems in Bayesian statistics where it's also of interest to estimate the normalizing constant, which is called in Bayesian statistics the evidence. It's a partition function in statistical physics. Okay, so this is typically what we are, what is the problems that we are facing. And typically the problem is complicated because the state space can be here. So I will insist today on the case where the state space R is of a very large dimension. So I'm interested in the problem where D is very large. Okay, but I will explain that later. Okay, so to recap, what is the generic problem? Pi is known up to multiplicator factor, and there is no way to sample directly from pi because the classical method, the classical Monte Carlo, ID Monte Carlo, do not apply. Okay, so what we are doing is that we will use MCMC. MCMC are based on Markov chain, so I will explain what is a Markov chain, so very quickly, just to set up mostly the notation. So what are Markov chain? Markov chain are stochastic processes which are defined on the filtered state space, probability space, and the basic property of a Markov chain, which is more or less a formal definition of what is a Markov chain, by the way, is that when you look at the conditional distribution of the n steps of the xn, which is x is a stochastic process, so xn is the element n of this process, and when you look at the conditional distribution of xn given the whole path of the stochastic process, the conditional distribution of this xn is exactly equal to the conditional distribution of xn given xn minus 1. So there is a loss in memory, so which means in Markov chain what happens is that all the information you know from the past are more or less summarized in the last values that you have observed, and all what in the future is known if you know the present. Okay. Of course, when you have a process whose finite dimensional distribution have density with respect to some dominating measure, for example, the Lebesgue measure, if you want RD, this translates with the fact that when you look at the conditional distribution, the conditional density of xn given the whole past, it's exactly equal to the conditional distribution of the density of xn given xn minus 1. Okay. The last definition, so we are mostly interested today in homogeneous Markov chain. And an homogeneous Markov chain, in this case, you have an additional property which says that in fact, the joint distribution, the conditional distribution of xn given xn minus 1 is the same than the distribution of x1 and x0. X0. Okay, so what is the most famous example of Markov chains? The most famous example of Markov chain are random walks. So you can have a random walks, for example, on Z. So you have an ID sequence of random variables, so which can take two values, 1 and minus 1, with probability 1/2. And what you are looking at is you are looking at the xn, which is xn minus 1 plus zn, where zn is innovation. Okay, and what you observe, of course, is that if you look at the joint distribution, at the conditional distribution of xn given the past, the conditional distribution of xn given the past is equal to the distribution of xn given xn minus 1. If I know xn minus 1, I know the distribution of the conditional distribution of xn. I know that xn could be equal to xn minus 1 plus 1 or xn minus 1 minus 1, each with probability 1/2. Okay, so this conditional distribution is specified in that case by a matrix. It's an infinite dimensional matrix, of course, which is called mxy, which is equal to 1/2 if y is equal to plus 1 or minus 1. Okay, and you have the same when you have this time a random walk on R. In that case, so Zn is defined by this time. Say you have a Gaussian distribution, and so what you obtain is basically you have basically the same type of ID. So in that case, the joint distribution is specified by something which is called the conditional density of y given x, which is given by this quantity. Okay, so that's plots of random walks, very familiar to you. So in most cases that we will analyze, in fact, you are in the case where we'll have a kind of iterative model. So we Markov chain in general, they are most with very, very few theoretical, with some additional technical conditions, but which are very, very minor. You can always represent a Markov chain under this iterative form. Sometimes it's not very useful, but sometimes it is useful. And in the Markov chain literature, all the Markov chain more or less are specified exactly in this form. So where you look at Markov chain, it's simply a class of stochastic process which are defined by a kind of autoregressive, functional autoregressive form, where xn is a function of xn minus 1 and a random variable zn. So most all Markov chain can be written like that, at least when you are in when you are in Polish space, for example. So most of the interesting examples, they can be written like that. But sometimes this representation is not useful. But in MCMC theory, basically this representation is very useful. In which case, when you look at the conditional distribution, so if you look at the conditional expectation, if you take a function f, which is measurable, and if you look at the conditional expectation of f of xn given the past, so x0 to xn minus 1, this is a function of xn minus 1, of course, and this function of xn minus 1 is obtained simply by integrating with respect to the law of z1. So here the expectation is taken with respect to the law of z1 for each value of x of this quantity. And this function defines a version of this conditional expectation. Okay. So now to specify a Markov chain, what do you need? And this is more for notation. Of course, it's everything is obvious at this point. But this is a type of notation that we will use all the time, so it's better to introduce that. Otherwise, after 3 hours, you will be a little bit lost. So what we do is that we will, so when you want to specify an homogeneous Markov chain, you specify an homogeneous Markov chain by specifying something which is called a Markov kernel. Okay. Sometimes it's called a transition kernel, so I prefer to use a Markov kernel than transition kernel. The Markov kernel, in fact, is a function which is defined on the state space. So remember, x is x is a state space. Matcal x is the calligraphic x is sigma algebra, which is on the state space. And we take a function which is defined, which takes 2 arguments. So the first argument is a point in the state space, and the second argument is a set belonging to the sigma algebra. And this function takes value in 0, 1. And P is a Markov kernel if and only if you have 2 properties which should be satisfied. The first property is that for any given x in the state space, this function a pxa is a probability measure on x. So if I fix x, I define the probability measure on the state space x. Okay. And the second condition which is needed there is that if I take this time a in calligraphic x, then the function pxa should be is a measurable function from x to 0, 1. So when I say measurable, it means measurable with respect to the Borel sigma algebra, and measurable with respect to this calligraphic x. Okay, so this is exactly the way this is a Markov kernel. And when you define a when you have a Markov kernel, of course you might define the Markov kernel acts both on measures and acts on the act on measure and the act on functions. Okay, it's a bit like it extends, in fact, in the notion of matrix, if you wish. So when you act on measures, the way it proceeds, so you take a function f, taking, say, which are measurables, which is positive in order that this quantity is always well defined, and you might define, so given f, a function, measurable function, you may define p of f. Okay, so it's an image of f when you apply p. And this is defined simply by this integral. So in that case, you see the kernel as an operator on the set of measurable function. And it's a very simple exercise to see that p of x is also a measurable function. Okay, that's so if you take a measurable function, you apply p, and you obtain another function which is called pf. And in fact, given Markov kernel p, we say that a Markov chain is an homogeneous Markov chain with Markov kernel p if for all either measurable or positive measurable or bounded measurable function, the conditional expectation, you have a version of a conditional expectation of f of xn, so given the whole path, so xi from 0 to n minus 1, is equal to pf of xn minus 1. Okay? So in fact, it gives you the kernel gives, so of course it's almost surely because it's also it's only a version, but it means that pf defines the Markov kernel defines is a version of the conditional expectation. So what are the examples of kernels? So there are many examples of kernels. So when you have the random walk on M, then the kernel Pxa is given by this quantity. So sometimes it says it's probability starting from X to go to A, which is, and in that case, it's when you have a discrete state space. Of course, you simply have to sum over the Y belonging to the set A, Mxy. In that case, the kernel is a kind of infinite dimensional matrix, which is called sometimes the transition probability matrix. Then you have a density with respect to, say, the Lebesgue measure. It's not very important that this is a Lebesgue measure. Imagine that you have a dominating measure. So when you have a density, Pxa is specified by its integral with respect to A of Qxy of dy. Okay? And for iterative sequences, in general, you don't use this notation. You simply use this. So in that case, Pxa, so transition kernel is equal to expectation of the indicator of A of fx of z1. Okay, and there is a theorem which is a very old theorem. It's called it's a Ionescu-Tulcea theorem, which says that basically it's a kind of extension of the Kolmogorov theorem, which says that provided is more or less a converse of the previous result, if you start with the state space, okay, which can be of very, very general, so there is no assumption. So the state space is not you don't need even to have that X is countably generated, so it's like very, very general state space. And if you have a Markov kernel which is defined on X and calligraphic X, which is sigma algebra, then you might construct on a canonical space. So a canonical space, in fact, is a set of sequences taking value in X, and F is the sigma algebra, is a product sigma algebra. You may define the canonical process, so Xn, which is a coordinate process. If you take an element of omega is a sequence taking value in X. The canonical process is simply, you take simply Xn. If you apply Xn to omega, take the n values of this sequence. Is a Markov chain with Markov kernel P initial distribution. So for any nu, you may define a probability measure, P nu, on the canonical space, which is such that the canonical process Xn is a Markov chain with Markov kernel P. Okay, so it's a kind of extension theorem. It's like the Kolmogorov theorem, but it's in the Kolmogorov theorems you need to have some condition under which a finite dimensional distribution of the process defines the law of the process. In the case of Markov chain, in fact, if you have a Markov kernel, there is no such conditions. Okay, so Markov kernels also might so we see we have a Markov kernel, it defines the distribution of Markov chain, and Markov kernel acts on functions, and Markov kernels act also on measures. And the way it acts on measures is act on measures like with this type of relation. So if I take a measure nu now, if I take a Markov kernel P here, when I compute the integral of x of nu dz pza, okay, I obtain a new probability measure. It's also a probability measure because when I have a Markov kernel, because pza is a probability, if a is equal to the state space x, pzx is equal to 1, so this integral is also equal to 1. So this is also define a probability measure. Okay? So it's easy also, it's a simple exercise to verify that it defines really a measure, and in the case it's really a probability measure. And what is nu p? Once you have defined p nu, what is nu p? Nu p is really, in fact, when you have nu p is a distribution of x1 given under p nu. So p nu is, so you have defined x1 is a probability distribution, so it's very easy. Just is a simple mechanics. So when I write what is E nu of f of x1, okay, so I know that under p nu xk is a Markov chain. Is a Markov chain with Markov kernel k p. So which means what? It means that when I take the conditional expectation of f of x1 given say f0 of x, So I call fkx is equal to the sigma algebra g less than k. I know that this is equal to p of f of x0, and this is true p nu almost surely. Okay, this is the definition of what is a Markov chain. This is the definition of p nu. So if I just use tower property, so I know that this is equal to expectation of nu of f of x1 given f0x. Okay, this is a tower property of conditional expectation. Okay, and then if I just substitute this conditional expectation with p of fx0, this is equal to E nu of p of x0. But I know that the distribution of x0 is nu with this, so it's equal to the integral nu dx of p f of x. Okay, so which means that the distribution, this is true for all f which is positive measurable or bounded measurable. Okay, so which means that x nu p, so if I take nu, you transport, it's a transport of measure, so p transports the measure nu, it gives another probability measure which is nu p. So p, as the Markov kernel, acts both on function and on measure. Okay, another thing that you can do, of course, it's a bit like it behaves a bit like a matrix. What you can do also, you can define what are the product of Markov kernels. So P1, P2 is defined by P1 x dz, P2 za. Okay, so it is also easy to see that it's properly defined. It's properly defined because this is a measure. Okay, this is a measurable function, so this integral is well defined. And then also and this is a function because P1x is measurable. This function is also measurable, so it also satisfies. In fact, so if you take two Markov kernels, the product of this defined like that define a proper Markov kernel. So you can then define what is a product Pn. So it's you simply iterate this product n times, and using basically the same type of argument, you might show that nu Pn is a distribution of xn, the canonical process xn, under p nu. So the law of f of xn is nu Pn of f. Okay. So of course, because you have this, okay. So there is when it exists, in fact, there is a particular measure which plays a key role. It does not always exist, but sometimes it exists. And this measure is invariant measure. So what is the invariant measure with respect to a Markov kernel P? It's a fixed point of the Markov kernel P. So it's a measure which satisfies pi P equal P. Okay. And there is a very famous theorem which is due to Birkhoff, so from the 60 and from the 30, by the way. And which has an extension. It's Birkhoff theorem is an ergodic. It's really an ergodic theorem, so it has nothing to do with Markov chain. It's much more general than that. But when you apply the Birkhoff theorem to Markov chain, you end up with a very, very simple statement which says that it's almost an if and only if P has a unique invariant distribution. Okay, so if you know that P has a unique invariant distribution, so there exists one probability measure pi and only one which is such that pi P equal P, then for any f which is integrable with respect to pi, if you take now this pi out of nf, okay, which is average, you average f of xi along one trajectory, you will converge pps almost surely to fx pi dx. Okay, that's the Birkhoff theorem, the way it is stated for Markov chain. So in the case of when you have a discrete space Markov chain, of course you need the properties that you have to find condition upon which you have a unique stationary distribution. So it's not always it's not always super easy, but you know that, for example, that it is then when you have a finite size space Markov chain, the Markov chain should be irreducible in some sense. where irreducibility means for discrete state space Markov chains, it's the fact that when you given any two states, you have any two states communicate. So it's not the right. It's not the right. Is not the right when you have continuous state space Markov chain. Of course, all what you know on discrete state space Markov chain should be completely revisited, because of course you will never, so two states will never be visited infinitely often. So you have the right notion of irreducibility. So you have two notions of irreducibility. So you need to be irreducible for continuous, the irreducibility for continuous state space. So there are two more or less apparently different definitions, but which are basically the same. So is the first notion, which is called phi irreducibility. So phi, so you take phi, a measure, a non-trivial measure, not a probability, but it's a non-trivial measure on x, okay? And you will say the following: you say that P, the kernel P is phi irreducible. Means what? It means for all x in X, okay, and for all A in such that phi of A is strictly positive, okay, the probability starting from X that you reach A with a positive probability is strictly larger than 0. Sigma A is the infimum of n larger than 1 at xn A. It is called a return time. Okay, that's a return time to A. Okay, so phi irreducibility means, what? Means that you have a probability measure. You say that the kernel is phi irreducible if for all set A which has a probability, which has a positive phi measure, then for any point of the state space, you will enter A with positive probability. And this is the right definition when you have phi irreducible, basically. And if there exists an invariant probability measure, if you are phi irreducible, then this reducibility measure is unique. Okay, so that's the first notion. And there is a second notion which seems to be completely different, but in fact they are equivalent, which is based on the definition of what is called a small set. The literature is a bit confusing because in Markov chain you have small set and petit set. So petit they have been invited by, so it has been, so the theories, most of the theory for Markov chain has been done in the 60s of continuous state space. And there is a paper by Marie Duflo, which was called Marie Kaplan. At that time she's doing his PhD, and she has invented the petit set. The petit set is generalization of the small set, and the English, so in the US they use petit as a tribute for French, the French word petit. So when we say small in French, so we have small and petit. So we define small. So what is a small set? A small set, so you take A, you say C. So C in X is say small. Okay, if and only if. For all if and only if there exists epsilon positive and a non-trivial mu, okay, which is such that for all x in C there exists epsilon positive m in, so for all x in C and all A in x, you have Pm xa, which is larger than epsilon mu of a. Okay? So which means that for any point when you are in x, when you are in C, there is a positive probability of going anywhere. So you might go, when starting from x, you have a positive probability in m step so this measure is larger than epsilon mu of a. So for any x in x. This state plays a very important role in the theory of Markov chain. And what we can show is that in fact these two notions are equivalent. And this is a theorem which is quite difficult, which is due to Jain. So 60 something, 64, 65, which says that these two notions of irreducibility are in fact equivalent, and all these notions, if any of these two notions are, so if you, so the notion is the following. So that's a small set, and you say and irreducibility means what? So you say that the Markov chain is irreducible, means what? That there exists a small set C, which is such that for all x in X, okay, so which there is a small set which is reachable. So which means that there is a small set that you can reach for any point. So if there is a small set that you can reach with positive probability from any point of the state space, and these two notions, in fact, are equivalent, and all these two notions, in fact, imply that if there is an invariant distribution, this invariant distribution is unique. Okay, so well, starting from that, it gives us, in fact, what is very important for MCMC. So what you, so the idea you can use with from Birkhoff, in fact, is that you get. So if you can construct a sample Markov kernel P with invariant probability pi, and imagine that you can efficiently sample from this kernel. So what you will do typically is that you will sample a Markov chain from this kernel, and then you will compute average, and you know that from the Birkhoff theorem that it is possible to approximate pi of f by simply averaging the trajectory of Markov chain along a single sample. And of course, the question, which seems to be complicated at first sight, is there a way to construct a Markov kernel which has pi as invariant distribution? And the surprising answer is yes. In fact, there is a very clever way to construct that. There are many different ways, but there is a very clever way to construct that, which is very general. And this has been observed by Metropolis, as I say, in the end of the 50s. Okay, so the idea comes from, as I say, statistical physics, and so this is why we are in the School of Physics. So we need to credit people from statistical physics, and the idea is very clever. In fact, they force a condition which seems to be more constrained than being simply an invariant distribution. Why they were looking at, they were looking at probability distribution P, pi, which are not only invariant with respect to P, but which are reversible with respect to P. So what does it mean, reversible? It means this, that this property is satisfied. So which means that if you take two sets, A1 and A2, in this sigma algebra X, and now if you look at the integral of A1 and A2 of pi dz1, pz1, dz2 is equal of A1, A2 of pi dz2, pz2, dz1. So the thing which is important to notice there is that we have switched. What is the difference between these two notation is that you have switched the order of integration. So you have switched a variable. So you see it's z1, and here it's z2, here it's z2, and here it's z1. So what is pi dz1, dz2? In fact, pi dz1, dz2 is the law. Is the law of so what is pi? So when you start from this, so you have I start from pi. So if pi is the initial measure, I'll take f and g I take f and g, which are positive measurable function. Okay. And what I compute the expectation starting from pi of f of x0 and g of x1. Okay, I simply use the tower property, so I condition with respect to x0. So it's f of x0, which is measurable, and take the conditional expectation of g of x1 given x0. Okay, which is, okay, you use now the fact that under p of x, under p of pi, x1 is a Markov chain with transition kernel p, so it will be e pi of f of x0, and this time p of g of x1, okay, and this is equal, p of g of x0, sorry, and this is equal to the integral of pi of dx0 of fx0 pg of x0, and this is a double integral, of course, of pi dx0 p of x0 dx1 f of x0 g of x1. Okay, so it's really, when you look at what is pi dx0 p of x0 dx1, in fact, it's the joint distribution of x0 and x1. And when the Markov chain is reversible, it means what? It means that the joint distribution of x0 and x1 is the same as the distribution of x1 and x0. So which means that you can reverse the time. Okay? Okay, so which means that if the Markov chain, if you start from pi, in fact, the distribution of, if you look at the distribution of x0, x1, it has the same distribution as x1, x0. And of course, it's more the fact that pi is reversible with respect to p implies that pi is invariant with respect to p, because if you take this condition and if you simply assume that a1 is equal to x, okay, what you will obtain there is you will obtain that you have the integral of you integrate over a1, okay, pi dc1 p, so the integral over a1 of pi dc1 p, so a1 is equal to x, is equal to pi p of a2, okay. And now if you just use this condition, now your a1 is equal to x, so you integrate with respect to a2, so you first integrate with respect to x. When you integrate over x with a1 equal x, this kernel is equal to 1, so it's equal to pi of. Okay, so the reversibility, of course, implies is much stronger than the reversibility of a Markov kernel is much stronger than invariant. So if you are reversible with respect to pi, of course, you are invariant with respect to pi. It's even much stronger than that. This is called the detailed balance condition. With respect to this condition, is called the global balance condition. Okay. So of course, when you have when you have a Markov kernel which is over discrete state space, the detailed balance condition is written like that. So you have pi of x mxy is equal to pi of y myx, and in fact the interpretation is easy. It says that you have, if you have discrete state space, if you're under a distribution, you have pi of x is the occupation measure of the state x, and pi of x mu x y is the fraction of mass which is in one step going from x to y. Okay, and here pi of y is mass of y, myx is a fraction of mass going from y to x, and if you satisfy the detailed balance condition, in fact these two quantities should be equal. In the continuous settings, you have exactly the same type of relation, which is pi of x qxy is equal to pi of y qyx. Okay, so now the metropolis testing algorithms. So what is the rationale for that? So there are of course much more general formulation, but to make things simple, I will assume here that the state space X is Rd, and I will also assume that pi has a density with respect to the Lebesgue measure. Okay? And also I assume that pi is known up to a multiplicative constant. And so what we do is that I will try to construct, we try to show that it is possible to construct a transition density which is such that pi is reversible with respect to a transition kernel P, which is such that pi is reversible with respect to P. So I start with what is called a proposal density, which is called QXY, because that's a transition density, Of course, I assume that this transition density is bi-measurable, so it's measurable with respect to the pair xy, and which is such that for all x, y, qx is a density, a probability density, which I also denote qx. So that's an example. So if I, for example, if I propose, starting from x, if I propose y according to a random walk on R, this will be typically the density. If I propose independently from x, that I will have q of xy equal to fy, so which means I propose y without looking at x. Okay? Most often we'll see that proposal kernel are specified by this type of relation, so they are given by autoregressive process, and most of the time by autoregressive process of that sort, in which case the Markov kernel, the Markov qxy, qxa given by this expression, that Markov kernel, and this is the associated transition density. Okay. Okay, and what is a metropolis hastings kernel? So metropolis hastings kernel proceeds as follows. So you start from x0, and you have a transition, you specify a transition kernel, say with respect to the Lebesgue measure, otherwise you have to be a little bit more careful. What you will do at each step of the algorithm, what you do is typically that you will propose a new point, yk plus 1, according to this transition density. So this symbol means that you are proposing yk plus 1 according to this transition, Markov transition density, so Q of specified xk. So it's like it's a law. In fact, it's a bit like the notation is not completely mathematically correct, but it's I hope it's okay. So it means that you are at xk, that you are proposing a yk plus 1 according to this transition density, and you do that, of course, independently from the path. So yk plus 1 is really proposed independently from the path given xk. Okay, so that's your proposal, and what you will do is that you will either accept or reject this proposal with probability. So you will accept the proposal with the probability which is alpha of xk yk plus 1, or you will reject this probability with, of course, the reverse probability. Okay, this defines, in fact, a Markov chain, because, of course, it's clear that the law of this Markov chain is the law of xk plus 1 given xk. So if I look at the conditional distribution of xk plus 1 given xk, given the whole path, in fact, it's only the distribution of xk plus 1 given the last point xk. In fact, you can write this Markov chain, you can write xk plus 1 as a kind of iterative, so nonlinear autoregressive process, so xk plus 1. So then you have to define two random variables, because there are two random variables that need to be specified. So you need to specify a first random variable, which is a proposal, yk plus 1, which is proposed according to this quantity. And you have a second random variable, which is uk plus 1, which is a uniform random variable, which is independent from xk, yk plus 1, and all the past, which is which define, in fact, the probability of choosing to accept yk plus 1 or to reject the proposal. Okay, so either you accept with this probability, or you reject with 1 minus alpha k probability, and this is simply these two stuff. Okay. So in fact, it's defined a Markov chain, and the thing which is, I will not go through all the details, but the thing which is when you start from this formula, so it's a kind of easy calculation to show that you have a Markov kernel. The Markov kernel associated to this the sequence of random variable is defined there. And you see that there are two parts in this Markov kernel. There is one part which is a part on which you have accepted the move. Okay, so when you have accepted the move, basically you have accepted the transition from x to y with certain transition density q, which has been accepted with probability alpha. Okay, so this is a part. This is a part where you have accepted the move. And there is one part where you have stayed at the point x, where there is a mass, typically a mass probability, which is, and the probability is that you have accepted. So when you reject, you stay at this point. So you stay at the point with a certain mass, which typically in most cases has a positive probability. And this mass is given by the probability of rejecting the move. Okay, so either you move according to Q and you accept the move, or you reject the move and you stay at the point, and you stay at a point, and when you stay at a point, you stay with the probability which is given by this integral. The second property, which is very important in this setting, it's not completely trivial, but it's we not go through all this calculation, but is the fact that under very, very general conditions, in fact, which can be even more general than that, so you don't need to have densities, you have extension of this, which is called, if you're interested, there is an extension which is called the Metropolis-Hastings-Green for in homage of Peter Green. So there is a way, in fact, to extend that beyond the case where you have joint density. So there is a significant extension, in particular, that becomes important when you are looking at Markov chain, for example, on manifold. You need to be much more careful in defining the algorithm itself, and checking the reversibility in that case is not easy, but there are ways to do this. But when you are ready to do simple stuff, then what is easy to check, moderately easy to check, is that you are reversible with respect, so the Markov kernel is reversible with respect to pi. Okay, so which means that Metropolis-Hastings is a way to define a kernel which is reversible with respect to pi, and hence as pi as a unique invariant probability measure. Okay, so that's the definition of Markov chain. And now we'll see quickly how we can analyze. I will be interested. So, of course, one question which more or less was almost one of the first questions that you might ask is that how fast this Markov chain converges to equilibrium. So it was a theme in Markov chain theory, which has you have books on that. I have written a book if you are interested. If you have some time for your vacation, it's 800 pages, so it's 24 chapters, so it's plenty of time to read during vacation. And so there are many different ways to handle the problem, which is how to be able to quantify how fast the Markov chain relaxes to equilibrium. Okay, so there are many ways to look at this problem. So typically what you do, so we will at least see two different ways. So, but one of the classical ways to look at what is called total variation. So total variation, so what you will do typically is that you will take a distance or between measures. In this case, the distance is a norm. But you can substitute the distance by other distance. You can take, instead of total variation, you can look, for example, at Wasserstein. Sometimes I will do that for Langevin, because sometimes Langevin is easier to analyze with Wasserstein rather than TV. So what is a TV? So when I take two probability measures, mu and nu, I compute the distance between mu and nu by looking at the infimum. This should be the supremum there. It should be the supremum of mu a minus nu a. So it's not the infimum, it's the supremum. So otherwise it will be 0. So it's replaced inf by a sup. So it's the supremum of mu a minus nu a, okay, which is also the supremum over f smaller than 1 of mu f minus nu a. Okay. So that defines what is called the total variation distance. So it is linked with coupling. It is linked with many. So there are many very nice properties of this distance. But it's look at this distance, for example, and the type of problems that you might ask is that how fast you converge to this to pi, and the simplest, I would say, way to look at this is called uniform ergodicity, and uniform ergodicity has more or less been hinted, not formally demonstrated, but hinted in the work by Dublin. So Dublin, one was of I know that Frederick likes history in maths, so Dublin passed away in 40, basically, I think in 40. And so when he was a student at École Normale, he wrote a memo on Markov chain, which is, he has also written on Brownian motion, but it has been discovered much later. So it's an interesting paper by Marc Yor on this, which is that it has been discovered at the death of Fréchet, that he has sent later during, he was sent to the front during the French-German War, Second World War. and he has invented more or less something with version of phytocalculus, but this is published. This work is published. It's a very nice work. It's which is published in 38, and he more or less guess. Of course, it is formalized in a different way because it was really the first working on this type of topic. So he was one of the first. He was the first, more or less, to try to extend the notion of Markov chain on continuous state space, and he comes with some kind of property of this sort. And okay, so he says, okay, what is uniform ergodicity? Uniform ergodicity is says the following thing. It says that you have pi, and you are uniformly ergodic when Pn of x, okay, converge to pi in total variation distance, okay, with geometrically fast. So you have rho to the power n, with rho is strictly less than 1, okay, with some constant c, and it's uniform. So it's uniform in the sense that this convergence is uniform in x. So it's very strong. Uniform in x, it means what? It means that for all x in x, you have Pnx minus pi, which is less than c rho to the power n. And there is a result which shows that if P is periodic, I think it's not needed really, but if P is uniformly geometrically ergodic, if and only if, okay, there is a set C, which is such that for all, there is a probability measure mu, which is such that for all A in X and mu A larger than delta, you have the infimum of X in A of Pnx and A, which is larger than epsilon. So in fact, it gives you, in fact, it means, so there is a simpler condition saying that basically the whole state space is small in the sense the whole state space is a small set. So well, in fact, it's more or less equivalent to see this, or to assume that the whole state space is a small set. This one is written in a slightly complicated way. So the whole state set is a small set means what? Means that, but for there exists a probability measure mu, which is non-trivial, which and there exists some m that for all x in X, you have Pmx A, which is larger than epsilon mu of A. Okay, and there should be an epsilon, which should be strictly positive when which means that X is small. The whole state space is small. Of course, so the result is super easy, but it's a very strong condition. Of course, it's not satisfied in many cases. Okay, it's not satisfied in many cases. So what you can prove in such cases, so there are some applications. I will show you typically one application. So when you look at the Metropolis Hastings case, and you are looking at something which is called the independent Metropolis Hastings algorithm. So independent means what? Means that when you look at the proposal kernel QXY, you say that you are looking at the independent Metropolis Hastings. Means what? Means that you are proposing a new point y from a probability distribution phi, probability density phi, independently from x. So in this case, you are independent, so which means that the move that you propose does not depend on the point where you start. So you generate, so at each iteration of the algorithm, what you do typically is that you generate a new point yk plus 1, independent from the past, and then you either accept or reject xk with probability alpha of xk yk plus 1, or with probability 1 minus alpha of xk yk plus 1. And then you accept or reject with this probability alpha xy, which is in such case defined, it's always defined as p tilde of y, it's normalized, so pi is, because you use ratio, I should have said that before, because you use ratio, of course, the normalizing constant doesn't play a role, but here, because you have here q of ex, this is phi of x, q of xy is phi of y, in that case, this distribution, this alpha xy simplifies. And what you can prove, and it's one of the many results which has been obtained in this more or less the first paper which has been written on in MCMC on the convergence of MCMC. So it's really the theory of MCMC really started in the 90s. The algorithm were present before, but so the real theoretical results on MCMC started in the 90s, and one of these two guys were Gareth Roberts and Richard Willey. Richard Willey passed away in 2000, so a long time ago, but he was very active. in this direction, and they have obtained a very simple but nice result, which says that if you are in the case where pi of x is less than m of phi of x, so which is, remember, if you know some simulation, it means that your phi of x, in fact, is an envelope of pi of x. It is exactly the condition which is used in accept-reject algorithm for dark option. So you are in the case where you have a you want to sample from pi of x. You propose according to phi of x, and the condition is that m times phi of x is larger than pi of x. In such case, what you can prove is that the independent Metropolis Hastings kernel converge to pi with a rate which is 1 minus 1 over m to the power. And the good thing is that, contrary to an accept-reject algorithm, you don't need to know m to run the algorithm. But of course, this is a very restrictive condition, so there are many cases where this type of condition do not hold. Okay, so I will stop that for the introduction, and now I move to Langevin. Now we have all what is needed to start to look at Langevin. And I will start with motivation. So as I said, there have been a lot of work on MCMC. So since in statistics, it really started in the mid-80s, and the theory was really the blooming days of MCMC were in the 90s, I would say, in 2000s. But so later on, say around 2010 or a little bit before, so people start to be interested in doing Bayesian statistics in very large dimension, and the more or less independent research effort which have been done in this direction, both in computational statistics and also in machine learning community. So there are many applications. So the first application, of course, is obviously Bayesian inference, and Bayesian, when you try to do Bayesian inference for high-dimensional models, I will give an example just later on. So I will use this example. So Bayesian inference for high-dimensional would be the way I will illustrate what I do. But there are also a very interesting problem. I will not discuss it, but it's a problem I am very interested in, which is Bayesian inverse problem. There are, of course, applications like image restoration or deblurring, but there are many other problems where you have PDEs, for example, you have measurements, and then you are willing to learn results on so uncertainty on PDEs, for example, from these measurements. There are other applications, of course, where you have to do sampling in high dimensions. So there is things which are more or less related to Bayesian inference, which is called the aggregation of estimator and experts, which has been very popular in machine learning at the end of 2010. So it's a little bit less popular now, but it's where instead of selecting, in fact, algorithm, you are aggregating algorithms. Sometimes it's called pack Bayesian methods. So there are very nice theoretical results, but to apply this result, you need to be able to sample according to some Poisson distribution. And of course, there is also a field of research which is also very active, which is related to Bayesian inverse problem, which is called Bayesian non-parametrics. And in Bayesian non-parametrics, what you do typically is that you are doing Bayesian inference, but this time the parameter is an element of function space. So it's like you have to define prior, but prior not on Euclidean space, but prior on function space. And of course, because you are using prior in function space are infinite dimensional. But of course, we do the sampling problem which are associated to Bayesian non-parametrics are typically a sampling problem in very large dimension. And the problem that people immediately have when they try to attack this problem is that most of the sampling techniques I presented in my past talk do not scale well to high dimension. Okay, and also, and I will not have time to discuss this today, but it's very important. In fact, in practice, there are two problems. So they do not scale well to high dimension. When I say do not scale, it means what? It means that perhaps the updates will become very costly, and also the mixing rate will be affected by the dimension. So that's these two issues. So we see that in fact, in some cases, in fact, we can prove that the mixing rate is not too much affected by the dimension. It's something important. Yet the update can be complicated. And there is another issue, which is related also to high dimension, is that typically when you are willing to do inference in high dimension, typically the number of data can be huge. This is what is called the big data context. So you need also some methods which have been used in MCMC cannot be used in that case because you need basically to implement them for a super large number of data, and this is really not simple. So which means that there are many challenges in this area, and after 10 years of research, all these challenges are still there. I would say we have not solved many of them. Okay, so as to give a kind of feeling of what we do, so it's the simplest example that you can imagine, which is a problem of in Bayesian inference for in a large dimension. I will give some application, but it's a very simple one, by the way. It's a very simple one. So what you do typically is that we really start on this problem. So now but this one is very easy to understand. So you have a binary response, which can be 0 or 1. Okay, and what you do is that you model this response 0 or 1. Imagine that it is a kind of classification problem. You classify this response 0 or 1. You classify them according, so you model them as a kind of latent, kind of latent variable model. In which case you assume that the yi are all conditionally independent Bernoulli random variables. So it's all this yi can take value 0 or 1 with some probability, and this probability is given by a function f, which is called a link function of, say, for example, it's very simple. In that case, say a link function of beta transpose xi. So where beta is what? Beta is a d-dimensional vectors with a known regression coefficient, and xi, say, are d-dimensional vector of known covariance. So that's the features that you have. It's a classification problem, and this is the features that you use. And because you are not very sophisticated, you simply use a model like this, which you simply take a linear combination of the feature, and then this linear combination of the features is the input of a link function, and then you just in this model, this link function is the success probability of a Bernoulli random variable. So it's a it's like a very classical problem in stat and in Bayesian statistics, and there are many applied Bayesian statistic problems which more or less still use this type of models. And there are two important special cases, which is probit regression and logistic regression. So probit is, in the probit regression, what you assume is that f, which should be, of course, it should be a function which should be positive. It's a probability, so it should be something which belongs between 0 and 1. And in probit, what you do is that you take for f the cumulative density function, the cumulative distribution function of the standard normal distribution. If you do logistic regression, you take simply the standard logistic cumulative distribution function. So because you are doing Bayesian statistics, what you do is you take a prior. So you can take, for example, a Gaussian prior. So that's a prior distribution on pi. So this is a Gaussian prior. Okay. I did not put here the normalizing constant because all the posterior is always defined up to normalizing constant. I do not specify the normalizing constant. I can use a Laplace prior, okay, or I can use more sophisticated prior like all-through priors. There are many more priors which has been defined for such problems. So Laplace is not necessarily a good one. Laplace is used because of this looks like lasso, but in fact it's when you do Bayesian statistics and when you are willing to do sparse linear regression, you don't have to use a Laplace prior. So it's so you have to use you can do sparse linear regression in Bayesian statistics, but to do this you need to use different type of priors, like for example all-through priors or other type of priors. So it's not necessarily a very good prior. This one. Okay, so that's another story. So what you do typically, so you have beta there, so you have a prior, and you have the model of data that I've used. So I remember that what I assume is that I've assumed that my observation, yi equal to 0, 1, there are Bernoulli random variable. This Bernoulli random variable has this probability of success. So which means, and they are assumed to be independent, so which means that this is a likelihood function. The likelihood function is this product of success probability. And then the posterior distribution is defined by taking the prior, okay? You multiply by pi beta, which is taking the likelihood, you multiply by pi beta, and you then obtain the posterior distribution. Okay, so to give an idea of a feeling of what are the dimensions, so So in the examples I'm working on now it can be much larger than that. But in the example I was working on, I will present later on. So D is large, can be something like 10,000, sometimes more. The number of observation is 400 of 10.6 or sometimes more. And you can do that for text categorization. This is typically what I did with when I started looking at that. 10 years ago, we were looking at a model which is called PLSA, so latent semantic analysis. So it's like text categorization. It can be used also for matrix factorization. It is used also in genomics and proteomics. I have done some work on gene expression analysis with John Drew from Stanford University. So exactly this type of models. And also there are many other data mining tasks which are more or less can be represented in this type of framework. So the dimension is large and the data size is large. It can be even much more larger than that. Okay. So what are the most popular algorithms in Bayesian statistics? So they are used on something which is called data augmentation. So what you do in data augmentation typically is that it's an idea which is a bit surprising when you do because what you do is that you add some dummy random variable, which is W. This is the idea of data augmentation. So W is dummy, so it's something like a dummy. And in fact, what you will do is that you will sample this data augmented distribution, okay? And then, of course, because if you're able to sample from this distribution, which is augmented by a dummy random variable, but you simply have to look at the marginal distribution of beta in order to sample from beta, okay? So there are a lot of theory of what you should on data augmentation. And so you apply for data augmentation, you apply the Gibbs sampler. I did not describe the Gibbs sampler before, so it's and the choice of so for data augmentation for probit link there is an algorithm which is very efficient and which is known since '93 by Albert and Shib. For logistic link, which is the most useful link in general in statistics, in fact it's a very complicated one. And there was until 2012, and this paper by Paulson and Squat. There were not a very efficient way to sample from this distribution. And the polygamma sampler is very, so polygamma sampler, in fact, it's implemented, so you can check it by yourself. In fact, when D is larger than 100, it more or less never converges. It's really too long. Okay, so you end up with this type of stuff. You might prove even some results. For example, for the polygamma sampler, for the polygamma sampler, in fact, there is a result which has been obtained by Kerr and I remember the name. So in 2013 or something like that. So it's after, of course, the invention. But they prove that this Markov chain is geometrically ergodic. But what they observe, they prove that with 1 minus rho. So rho is exponentially small in the dimension. So which means that it's 1. So which means that rho is 1 minus something which is exponential minus the dimension. So when D is equal to 10,000, this type of result is not super useful because it's contracting, but it's contracting with a rate which is exponentially small in the dimension. Okay, and of course, in fact, these algorithms are all very demanding, and they are applicable when D is small. Say it still works for 100, but of course, it doesn't work for larger dimension, and also the convergence rate is extremely slow when you have, for example, D larger than 100. And the thing which is it's amazing because when you see the problem, so for Gaussian prior, but this is equivalent to ridge regression, then you have a potential which is smooth and strongly convex. So I will explain that later. For Laplace prior, you have a non-smooth but still convex problem. So when you look at the non-Bayesian algorithm where this problem are very classical. So in fact in classical statistics, these are very simple problems. So if you are a frequentist, these problems are considered to be solved and is more or less very easy to solve. Whereas they are very complicated in Bayesian statistics. So my long-term objective when I start working on this was to try to say 10 years ago, was to try to contribute to fill the gap between the optimization and simulation and to develop algorithms which converge which convergence proof. So I think it's important to be able to derive a convergence guarantee, and of course it's also important to be able to derive convergence guarantee which are polynomial with the dimensions. Of course, it's useless to get exponential convergence, but with convergence rate which are vanishingly small, exponentially vanishingly small with dimension. And to do this, in fact, we used Langevin diffusion. Okay. So what is Langevin diffusion? So I just rewrite my model. I rewrite my model slightly differently. So what pi of x will be here my posterior distribution. So I forget the way it is defined, but it's a posterior distribution. The only thing I need to know is that I will write it as an exponential of minus u of x divided by its norming constant, but typically I don't know this norming constant. I assume also that I am on RD in that case. So it's exponential minus u of x, and u is a potential. So typically to take, if pi of x is a posterior distribution, in the Bayesian case, by u of x, the potential is simply the logarithm of, it's minus the log of the posterior distribution. So it's a way to recap. So I just forget the specific structure. For the time being, I just forget the specific structure of the model, and I simply look at this distribution. And what are the assumptions that I do? I will assume that the posterior distribution u is L smooth, which means what? It means that it is twice continuously differentiable, and that there is a constant L, which is such that for all x and y in RD, you have the gradient of u of x minus the gradient of u of y, which is less than L times x minus y. Okay, when I under this condition, I might define what is called the Langevin stochastic differential equation. And what is a Langevin stochastic differential equation is an SDE, which is defined by this relation, which if you forget the Brownian term there, it's simply a gradient descent minus grad of u of yt dt. So it's gradient descent, and then you add to the gradient descent, you add dBt. I put here a square root of 2 dBt. There are two ways to. So sometimes you put minus 1/2 here. I prefer to put in my work I put square root of 2 there, but it's not a big deal. So it's simply a change of time. And you can prove two things. So of course, because you have assumed that grad of u is globally gradient Lipschitz, what you might show is that you are in the case where you might define there is starting from x. Okay, if you start from x at time 0, this stochastic differential equation has a single strong solution. Okay, and this single strong solution might be used to define what is called the Markov semigroup, which is associated to the Langevin diffusion. The Markov semigroup of the Langevin diffusion is denoted here pt. So it's like for each t, in fact, it's a Markov kernel, but this time there is a time t which appears here. It's exactly like a Markov kernel. It simply says it's y. It means it's you start from x, okay, and at time t you are in the set A, okay. And what you can prove is not that difficult, but we don't have time to do that. Is that exponential of minus u of x is a unique invariant distribution, unique invariant probability measure for this Markov semigroup, which means that you have pi of pt, which is equal to pi. But there are some properties which are essentially non-quantitative, which has been proven for that under very, very weak condition. The first property, which is non-quantitative, is that when you start from x, and if you apply the Markov semigroup pt, it will converge to pi in total variation when t goes to infinity. So basically, you have almost, you simply have to have some condition of u of x in the tail. So you have something like what is called coercivity. So your potential, of course, it will not be true, of course, if u of x is vanishing in the tail. So you need to have some coercivity condition on top of that. But with very weak additional condition, you will have the Markov semigroup will converge to pi. And what you will have also with for nice functions, say for example for functions which are say twice continuously differentiable, that you will have the equivalent of a Birkhoff theorem. So for all x, when you average xt over f, the function f along a trajectory, you will obtain pi of f, and you have even a CLT, a central limit theorem, under also additional assumption. Okay, so which means that the Langevin diffusion, in principle, would provide a mean. If I have a way to sample from this Langevin diffusion, it gives me a mean to sample any smooth distribution, because pi of x is exponential minus u of x. So when I write pi of x equal exponential minus u of x, u is basically globally Lipschitz. And if I more or less can define then the Langevin diffusion, provided that U is there is some coercivity condition on the top of that. And if I know how to sample the Langevin diffusion, if I just use this two representation, I have a way to sample from the diffusion. A way to sample from. Okay, but of course we live in a digital world, so we don't live in a world where we are not able to produce yet the continuous time diffusion process. Perhaps it will be, if analog computing is developing, this is what we will do. So, but for the time being, we are still. So since I am close to the retirement, so I think I will not see this happening. But perhaps some of you will see that happen. So what we do is that we still do. We use Langevin diffusion, but we use a discrete time discretization. It's a discretization. So what I will do, I will produce, in fact, a discrete time sequence process xk plus 1, which is defined by this quantity, which is simply the Euler-Maruyama discretization of the Langevin diffusion, with a step size which can be, of course, I will use gamma k, so it's not necessarily a fixed step size. So I can use a decreasing step size or even a fixed step size, it depends. So it can be gamma k equal gammas, in that case it's a fixed step size, or I can use a decreasing step size. It changes a little bit the conclusion that I might have. So this is typically a Langevin, a Euler-Maruyama diffusion with perhaps a small trick there. The small trick is that you discretize, but you discretize with a step size which might be a step size which is decreasing as k goes to infinity. Of course, it's closely related to gradient descent algorithm, because it's like a discrete time version. So this is, you recognize, if you just forget this term, you simply recognize the gradient algorithm. So what you do is that you use a gradient algorithm, and on the top of that, you put some noise. So what are the questions? So of course, xk defined. If you take gamma k equal gamma, xk define an homogeneous Markov chain with a Markov kernel which has denoted R gamma. And what we will show, in fact, is that under some appropriate condition, you will find that this Markov chain is irreducible, okay, and positive recurrence, which means that what? It means that this Markov kernel has a unique invariant distribution, okay. This unique invariant distribution is pi gamma. Pi gamma means what? Means that this distribution does not typically, we will show that this distribution does not coincide with pi. What we will show, in fact, is that pi gamma is close to pi, and we will see how close they are. Okay? And what are the typical questions I need to answer? The typical question I need to answer are the following. So as I said, one important issue in simulation is to be able to quantify how fast I reach stationary regime. So from a computer scientist point of view, what is important to know is that you fix a distance, for example, total variation distance. I start from some point x, and I ask, okay, how should I choose? I choose an epsilon, because epsilon is the precision I need. And the type of question I need to answer is the following. So how many iterations should I run the algorithm in order to be close to pi, say in total variation, closer than epsilon with respect to pi? Okay, and of course the natural question is how this n depends upon the precision epsilon, and of course of our x. And how should I choose gamma in order to, because of course n will depend on gamma and epsilon, and of course what I'm interested in choosing the best n. Okay, so how should I choose gamma in order to satisfy this condition? And of course that's for constant step size, and an auxiliary question is to quantify the distance between pi gamma and pi. Of course, now if I use a decreasing step size, so this time I define a non-homogeneous or inhomogeneous Markov chain. This time which is associated with Markov kernel R gamma k. and then this will define a kind of a non-stationary Markov semigroup, which is called Q gamma p. So Q gamma p is a composition of R gamma 1, R gamma 2, R gamma p. And what is clear is that with this notation, the expectation of when you start from x of fxp, so it's like delta x of Q gamma p, so Q gamma p, but instead of having R gamma to the power p, Q gamma p, so don't be, Q gamma p is not a product, it's a product of this homogeneous Markov kernel. And so natural question are the following. So is there a way to choose a step size in order to be able to guarantee that delta x Q gamma p minus pi in TV goes to 0? And there is an if yes, is there an optimal way to choose a step size? So in such a way that delta x Q gamma p minus pi in TVs will be less than epsilon starting from some point x. Okay, and an auxiliary question is should we use fixed or decreasing step size? So we'll answer this question after the break. So to finish, there is another algorithm which is closely related to this, which is Metropolis adjusted Langevin algorithm. So in which case you propose according to the Langevin diffusion, but you add an accept-reject step. Okay, so it's called a Metropolis adjusted Langevin algorithm. Okay, which is it was considered before the advance in Hamiltonian Monte Carlo. It was considered as the state of the art in MCMC. It's no longer the case. HMC or no U-turn algorithm in this type of MCMC literature is really the state of the art now. But when you compute you compute the acceptance rejection step, and what you prove then is that is okay. So just to finish, so 2 minutes. I will not cover at all this in the second part, but so there are. I will not speak. It's an interesting issue, by the way. It's very interesting, and it's very in machine learning. It's really very important to be able to address this type of question. So, which is what I call the big data regime. So, what is in the big data regime? What you do is that you are sampled pi of x, which is the same thing. It's a prior distribution on x times the product of likelihood function, so pi y of yi given x, okay? Assuming that you have n observation which are ID conditioned to x, okay? So in that case, the likelihood function is a product of, and n is the number of observation, and as I said, n also can be very large. So this is typically what people face when you are doing machine learning, because you use machine learning with very large number of examples. And of course, evaluating if you want to use the Euler algorithm for doing this, you need to compute the gradient of log of pi of x, so which means that you have to compute the gradient over a super large sum of terms. Okay. So which means that at each iteration of the algorithm, if you do a gradient algorithm, what you need to do is that you need to sample. You need to the number of computations that you need to do is scale linearly with the number of observations. So okay, so it has been really a big concern in the MCMC community. So there were some people which have said, okay, we can still use accept-reject algorithm, but when you compute accept-reject algorithm, then you typically need to compute a ratio, which means that you need to evaluate this function at 2 points at least. And so you can try to do some tricks like using subset of data. There is some work, for example, which has been done by Rémi Bardonnet and Arnaud Doucet in 2014-17. So there is a paper at GMLR, but frankly speaking, it's not very convincing. And there is another work which has been the starting point was a paper by 2 very smart guys in machine learning, so Max Welling and Li Weite. So we're working now with DeepMind, so Oxford and DeepMind, and Max Welling, I think, is also, it has been, is in Amsterdam, but he has a joint appointment with, I think, Google. And they use what they call the SGLD. So instead of trying to try to find tricks in order to approximate the Metropolis testing ratio, what they do, they use Langevin diffusion, but they combine this Langevin diffusion with the idea of the mini-batch, which is used in stochastic gradient algorithm, especially, which is a key, in fact, in the optimization of deep neural nets. So what you do is that you do a kind of subsampling of the gradient. So what you do is that instead of computing the gradient, what you do, the log of the gradient of the log, so what you do is that you replace it by an unbiased estimator of this gradient. So it's what you do, you take a batch of points, so n, this small n is the size of the batch, okay? Small n is much, so it's not very well written there, because it's you take a sum over a batch, so you sample points according to in a batch of size n, so it's not only the first n points, so we correct that. And what you do is that you use as a gradient, in fact, a non-biased estimator of the gradient, which is it's the gradient of log of p0 of x, which is the prior times big N divided by n, times the sum from I belonging to a batch with cardinality small n of the gradient of log of pi, which is called a mini batch. In which case, so you have a stochastic estimator, but the cost at each iteration of this stochastic estimator, the cost is this time linear in n, okay? Linear in the size of the batch, instead of being linear in the size of the data size. This is called a stochastic gradient Langevin, and which is a kind of which is derived from stochastic gradient method, which has a long history in optimization in machine learning in the big data regime. So of course it's so you might use stochastic gradient. So instead of using now the full gradient, you use yk, which is the gradient but which is affected with some noise. So you can do some theory for this. I will not explain. So the thing that you need to be aware is that, of course, doing this, the gradient, you add some noise, which is some structured noise, and you have to be careful because there is a kind of competition. This structured noise typically is at each iteration is dependent from zk plus 1, but this structured noise, in fact, there is a competition between these two noise, and you can obtain results. I will not go in these details for the simulation. So here are some very incomplete references. So as I said, the Langevin algorithm has been more or less proposed in statistical physics by Parisi, and there are some papers by Frisch and Parisi which have really proposed to use the Langevin algorithm in statistical physics to compute free energy stuff. So it's used also in Bayesian statistics, and the first paper in Bayesian statistics is a paper by Grenander in 1993, which has been followed by this paper, which is by Grenander and Miller, so be 86. The first theoretical results were obtained by Roberts and Tweedy, which they have used. They have established exponential convergence on Langevin diffusion and its discrete approximation, and they have also introduced Metropolis adjusted Langevin diffusion. There is also Stramer and Tweedy, which have worked on this stuff. So there is a lot of work at the end of the 90s, but which were non-quantitative, so it's essentially non-quantitative. They are qualitative, so it's non. So they were not interested in obtaining, for example, a mixing rate. There have been more recently there have been a lot of work on Euler discretization, but more with application more in finance. So Gilles Pagès from Paris 6, Damien Lamberton, Stéphane Menozzi, and they really start to look at the problem of the discretization, and they use this idea to use decreasing step size for some reason, but they were interested mostly in weak convergence results. So it's not completely it's essentially non-qualitative, but it's more quantitative than the work before. And recently there have been a lot of papers by Arnaque Dalalian. I saw that Karagoulian is there, so and Karagoulian, I should have had that. So we work a lot on this, and they have obtained quantitative results. So there are several results. It's not at all complete. So there are, of course, a team. So Max Welling and Iwaite. So Vollmer and Zigalakis from Oxford and Warwick. Alexandre Thierry, so which we are working on this type of stuff. Okay, and that from Stack Exchange last year. So Okay, so I will stop here, and then I will start looking at more theoretical analysis of Langevin in the next in my next hour. Thanks a lot.
So I propose question during the coffee break and at the end of the keynote of Eric. Okay. So we have